We sure had a lot of kids starting off on a brand new school year. And the congregation is also looking forward to a new church program year. It's a special time of year for many. And in recognition of this, the worship team invited a few people to share their thoughts about the beginning of another school year. We will first hear a message from a student from Echo Christensen, a message from a teacher from Jim Powers, and a message from a lifelong learner from Kathleen LaFlamme. So let's start off by hearing what Echo wants to share with us.
Good morning. My name is Echo Christensen, and my pronouns are he, they. Going back to school has always been stressful for me. It's going from sleeping in till 10 to waking up at 6 and leaving within the hour. It's going from hanging out with my brother at home to being surrounded by at least 20 other people at any given time. It's going from doing simple chores while listening to a podcast to being demanded something different every 15 minutes. It's going from the odd hangout with my closest friends every couple weeks to going somewhere every day to rush from class to class to lunch to class and sit there while everyone around me is talking all at once and I have nothing to say. And all the while knowing I'll have to go back tomorrow. As an autistic person, it was exhausting to just write all that, never mind inevitably going through it this week. It can be really hard being autistic in a public school with nowhere to hide and demands, both spoken and unspoken, coming at me from all angles. And I think there's something to be said there about how public schools end up working against neurodivergent people so often. But something I recently realized is that viewing them not as demands but as responsibilities makes it all easier for me to want to do. I've relied on others' expectations for how well I should do in school to push me through since elementary school, but now that I'm on anxiety meds, they don't have the same effect. Now they're just frustrating and overwhelming. Mom. As I oh so cautiously tiptoe into adulthood, I want more agency over my own life. I want to do things by myself for myself. I want to help my fellow tenors to be the best they can for the choir and step in to get the neurodiversity club up and running after the founders graduated, and maybe even try to verbally participate in class. I want to try to build a future for myself, even in the world we're living in now. Even though it will be hard, even though people are actively trying to prevent me from doing so. I want to do this, not for my friends, not for my parents, not for the strangers that will ask me what I do for a living, but for me. Thank you.
All right, good morning, class. All right, my name is Mr. Powers, and I will be your chemistry and physics teacher this year. So please, everyone park your tuchus and put your phones away. For those of you who do not speak Old Yiddish, tuchus is a nice word for your butt, so park it and put your phones away. Oh, before I forget, this is Nixon. He is my class aide, assistant, and also he helps me with class discipline. So, keep this in mind. I will put him over here. He helps me keep track of the class, and he knows what you folks in the back are up to. He keeps an eye on you. If I don't see it, he does. So watch what you're doing. Okay, let's get going. Now, I, as your teacher, will get to know all of you as the year goes by, but I always think it's fair that I start the class telling you a little bit about myself so that you kind of get a vibe from me. So, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I graduated high school in '83 with a love of chemistry, of all types of chemistry. And before you ask when I say '83, it was 1983, not 1883, okay? I've heard this joke many, many times, okay? I went to college at UCSB, UC Santa Barbara, or UC Surfing Branch, as sometimes people ask. And after I did that, I went to UC Berkeley, where I got a PhD in chemistry. And while I was there, I discovered that I loved high voltages and toxic gases and things that exploded. It was great fun. I loved chemistry and physics. But while I was there, I also discovered I loved teaching. I had to teach undergraduate. It was so much fun. Well, I also discovered that, well, as a starving graduate student, I'd like some money too. So I said, someday I'll teach. But right now, being a young person, I want to make some coin. So I went off and joined this little unknown company. Maybe you've heard about it. It's called Intel. Do any of you heard of Intel, maybe? Any of you worked at Intel? Maybe your parents worked at Intel? Yeah, I figured maybe that was the case. So I decided to work at Intel, kids, but I thought to myself, someday I'm going to become a teacher. So I worked at Intel for 25 years. And finally, in 2016, I left the company. That's when someday arrived. Now, as a side note to just the adults here, I was let go in 2016. Now, I'll just point out that since then, they've had multiple rounds of layoffs. And frankly, the company has gone to hell since then. Now, does it have something to do with the fact they laid me off? I'll leave it to you to decide that's the case. I like to think that when I left, everything went to hell. Anyway, I digress. Whether or not I wanted to leave Intel or not, I was out. And so I decided at that point, well, when it comes to teaching, I guess someday has arrived. So at that point, at the age of 51, I went back to school. I went back to earn my master's degree and teaching credentials. Now keep in mind, at 51, I was old enough to be the parent of many of my fellow students. I was the oldest in my cohort by at least 15 years. At least. It took me 2 years and 1 year of student teaching. And I found a position teaching physics and chemistry afterwards at the Beaverton School District. Now, let's talk about going back to college as a mature student. Okay, now there are disadvantages I discovered there. I was going into an entirely new area of study. I was a chemist, an engineer. So I was going from a hard science into a squishy, hard to get your arms around it field of education, where nothing's right or wrong, but there's different ways of approaching things. I had to learn entirely new systems, computerized grading, creating digital systems, working with web pages, and the dreaded Zoom. I hate Zoom. I learned to loathe it. How many times I discovered kids got on Zoom and I discovered they were still in their pajamas with their hair doing this action in the morning and running the sleep out of their eyes. Oh, I learned to hate that thing. All sorts of new systems. I had to learn new systems of listening and decision making. When you're in a big company, you have a boss. You have a quick discussion and the boss says, we're going to do this. Can't do that in education. You have to have discussions. You have to hear everyone's opinions. You have to have a consensus. It was something entirely new to me. I had to learn how to do that. It's a new work style, too, I learned. You can't sit down and study for 8 hours straight. I was used to doing you do your work, you get it done, you can sit down and do the work. Can't do that when you're studying. Your brain will explode. I just couldn't do it. So I had to really learn some new tricks here. It had a lot of disadvantages I discovered as an as a mature person. But I discovered as time went by that I had some advantages that those youngsters didn't have. First, as a person that was becoming a high school teacher, I had raised teenagers myself. So I knew all of their tricks. That really helps you. I had already earned college degrees. I knew I could do it. Okay? Confidence is very, very important. That is critical. Do you know you can do something? Something that oftentimes is overlooked, we don't think about, is that life experiences, there is no substitute for it. The fact that I've had deaths in my life, not really for me, but financial hardships you may have had. You've had successes in your life. You've had failures in your lives. You've gone through child rearing, things like that. I better understood that in life there are shades of gray. Young people tend to think of things as black or white. But as an adult, someone who's had a few miles on the road, you understand that there are subtleties sometimes that young people don't necessarily see. I thought my cohort kind of looked at me as some old fart out of touch with reality. But as time went by, I started to be treated more as someone who was an experienced village elder, for a lack of a better phrase. Okay? Not someone who was completely out of touch and to be ignored, but maybe just somebody who might know something that they didn't know, the younger people. So what's it like being a high school teacher? Today's teenagers are out of their minds, okay? Let's just call it like it is. They're out of their minds. As a group, they can be impulsive, loud, opinionated, emotional, and downright silly. They can also be kind, sensitive, hopeful, possess a strong sense of social justice. They are exactly like us when we were their age, okay? Don't kid yourself, okay? The phrase, kids today, has been around since day one. Don't kid yourself. We've all said it. Our parents said it, their parents said it, all the way back since Adam and Eve. Always been said. We have to keep in mind that today's teenagers have been exposed to a world of different ideas. Thank you, Internet. These ideas are both good and bad. Now, let's be honest, many of their ideas, like many young people's ideas, they're unrealistic. But some of them will really challenge you. My advice to you is if you don't know any young people, go find them, okay? Find your grandkids, talk to the kid next door, do what you need to do. Go find yourself a 16-year-old, go find yourself a 22-year-old. Go find somebody who you're going to talk to and think to yourself, okay, that's a dumb idea. Because they may tell you 9 things that you think that ain't going to work. But one of them they may say to you and you're going to go, wow, I never thought about it that way. Or they may say something to you that you go, no, I'm wrong. Okay? They know some things you don't know. Get yourself challenged. You need to have that. As a teacher, I worked more hours than I ever did at Intel. God knows I made substantially less money. And like many teachers, there were days I cried in my car or I cried in the classroom after the kids left. Frustration, usually not with the kids. The staff of the school drove me nuts, and God knows the parents were the worst. The frustration was just enormous. So why did I do it? Why did most teachers do it? On those really tough days, we'd go to our desks, and we opened up the drawer. Most teachers had the drawer. And when they had that day that, I couldn't stand it, they'd go in and they'd get the letter. Most teachers who really cared had a letter, or two, or three, that they kept when they had that day where they just could not figure out, could they go another day? Could they get out of that Friday and go to school on Monday and do the teaching? And I brought one of those letters. I'm going to read it to you, okay? This was from a student who had just been diagnosed with epilepsy. Now, I am an epileptic, excuse me. Mine is very well controlled, has been for years. I always told my class I had this, and if for whatever reason I just started to space out or fell over, don't worry about it, just go get the staff, they'll take care of it. But the student wrote to me, Mr. Powers, thank you for making your classes special and engaging and for providing a safe, welcome learning environment. I really enjoyed your innovative teaching and curriculum. Most importantly, I really appreciated your support, patience, and guidance with my technical and physical barriers and struggles I faced. It really helped me strive and push me to become a better version of myself. Thank you for all of your help with carving the pathway to long-term success. This is the golden rule of teaching. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Being a teacher was the best job I ever had. And in case you're wondering, Nixon and Echo, you did a fabulous job. Yeah. But let's say Echo is not paying attention. I could say, Echo. I bet Echo's going to be quiet. But if Echo's really not quiet, then Nixon comes up to her and goes, and I guarantee you, Echo will be quiet. Because how many of you would like to be sitting in front of the church when Echo or when Nixon comes up to you and goes, you will quiet down. So that's why I and Nixon became teachers. Thank you.
Well, that is a hard act to follow, and I cannot promise to be inspirational. In my freshman year of college in Detroit, Michigan, I had a required class with a professor who had studied art in New York City. One day, she told us about a class that she had while she was there. It was supposed to be a painting class, but her teacher spent most of the time monologuing. If you've ever been to art school, you've had one of these. All he did was name drop about all the famous art world people that he knew or partied with. He had very little interest in his students' work. They were his captive audience as he just went on about all of these people that he'd met. And Professor Snowden said that she and her fellow students, realizing that he was not going to help them paint any better, started asking a lot of questions about these artists. And by the end of the semester, they had turned a disappointing painting class into a pretty thorough survey of contemporary art. They had learned a lot about the major players in the New York art world. She told us this story to show us how any experience, no matter how difficult or disappointing, can be reframed as an opportunity for lifelong learning. And I paid attention to that because those first few months in Detroit were full of learning opportunities for me. Before arriving, I had expected that a major American city would have urban amenities, culture, public transit, access to offices and stores and the institutions that I would need to establish an independent adult life. I don't hear anyone laughing, but anyone from Michigan would probably be doing so now. My first shock was Detroit's almost complete lack of a public transportation system. Without a car, I was stranded in barely functional, sometimes violent neighborhoods. I slept on the floor, just in case. The heat in my apartment didn't always work. Michigan, winters. Appliances were missing or broken. Takeout, gas station food. There was one terrible, badly stocked grocery store in the neighborhood. Those were my first encounters with the practical, on-the-ground impact of institutional racism. Detroit's urban planning in the 90s and the decades previous was deliberately bad. It was meant to isolate anyone poor enough to have to live in the neighborhoods that I could afford as a college student. And by the 90s, the functions of a city had been deliberately hollowed out. I got a real education in how to survive in a dangerous environment with very few resources, no social connections, and also in how widespread those conditions were and what it looked like to survive in them every day for the people who'd lived there their whole lives. And when I tried to explain this to my parents, they didn't believe me. This would become a theme. Another theme playing out in Michigan at the time was the very frequent, almost weekly stories about auto plants closing and thousands of people losing their jobs. The foundations of the mid-century economy were crumbling under the feet of the people who expected those jobs to last forever. Some of my fellow students had to drop out of college when one or both of their parents lost their jobs. And what struck me, I'd seen unemployment before, I'd seen bad economic times, but what struck me was the sense of astonishment. A lot of people were mystified and furious that the structure that they had taken for granted was disappearing. Alcoholism, suicide, and workplace shootings were rising. A very large group of people felt personally cheated and betrayed that their world was changing and they had to adapt. And while this was happening, the internet was reshaping the world. Yes, it did dramatically increase economic growth and create a lot of new fields and new jobs, but first it made a lot of jobs and degrees obsolete. And like many of my peers, I graduated college with already outdated skills that had been outdating while I was in school. I've gone back to school a few times to stay employable. But my first professional lesson was this: forget the world you know. The past is not a guide to the future. Survival depends on being able to assess the terrain that you're on right now and learn whatever you need to adapt to it. And if this sounds dystopian, it is, and it felt that way to all of us at the time. We were terrified to graduate. It's said that Generation X Americans and those after us have never lived in a country that served its people's well-being. And I came from the Northeast, where education is a high-stakes rat race that starts in the single-digit ages, doesn't let up until college graduation, and determines the rest of your life. If you don't come from money, your ability to learn and know things might save you from a life of poverty and all its accompanying shame. Might. It's a ticket to the lottery, not a guarantee. So against that background, when I hear people talk about the advice of being a lifelong learner, it sounds so lofty and philosophical and virtuous. It sounds like you'll become a more enlightened, wiser person who can intelligently discuss current events at parties. And I hear that advice very differently. I hear it as survival. I hear it as the best survival skill any of us can really have. Remember history, learn from it, draw lessons from it, but always, always ask, how is the world different now? What new problems demand attention? What solutions can I find or invent for those problems? Where are my new opportunities? Some people get very, very angry when the world changes. There's neurological research on this, that people whose minds don't adapt well to change are more likely to end up in certain political movements because someone is promising them that if you follow us, we'll make sure you never have to learn or change. That is a lie. You all know this. But some people feel that if their knowledge is obsolete, they are now obsolete, and they take out that anger on anybody who symbolizes change. There's a better path. Whatever you know, you are never obsolete. You can always learn new things, find new places in today's landscape where you can make a contribution or find something new to enjoy. The world of today is not the world of 5 years ago. The challenges are different. The opportunities are different. The social activism of today needs to be different than it was in the 60s. There are special interest communities springing up everywhere. As Echo said, there was no neurodivergent club when I was in high school. There were just the weird kids that nobody talked to. That's a tremendous innovation. There are really good new books and movies and TV shows. You can find something new to be part of. Keep your mind open. Allow yourself to stretch and embrace the constant back-to-school mindset, because there is always something new to learn. Thank you.